I suppose the first thing one should do when thinking about what Orientalism is to establish what the term actually means historically. So before Orientalism became a dirty word in Said's account, and I'm exaggerating, but I'll define it in a second. Orientalism was actually an academic discipline that students took up when they wanted to learn the language, the customs, the literature, the philosophy of anything relating to the world, probably of what we may think of as the Islamic world today. Obviously, this is a very fraught term now, but you know what I mean. So it was an academic discipline first. Then we have the emergence of what is an artistic genre. So of artists depicting maybe what they see, what they read about, what they hear about this region. That becomes more than just physical observation of people and places. It becomes a real genres with stereotypes and tropes and visual compositions that people begin to recognize. So see here, we have Lewis depicting an interior and then reutilizing it in his depictions of harems when he's back in London. So a real genre of painting that sells really well. And then in the 70s, Orientalism becomes a critical theory term. Edward Said writes the eponymous book Orientalism. It's a change in the way that we think about Orientalism because he defines it as no longer something that pertains to the region of Middle East, Southeast Asia, North Africa, but as something that speaks more to what Europeans are experiencing in the late 19th, early 20th century. This art does not accurately depict what it feels like, what it means to live in this region. It more so depicts the anxieties, the desires of Europeans who are in this region, colonizers, adventurers, explorers, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a word that encapsulates an experience of modernity, but not one that necessarily pertains to this region. And in fact, it can even do damage to this region by means of these visual stereotypes where this Orient is depicted as timeless, as without work, as lascivious. For example, the image of the odalisque is very important in this because such an important trope in art that extends to thinking about social norms in this region, but that has actually no relationship whatsoever to the reality of this region. So we have an incredibly long-lasting visual trope of the harem, of the odalisque in the harem, but you would never see these women or these kind of scenes in the region. The quick answer is no. And this is something that scholars are still in the process of trying to decode. But very famous artists, for example, in the Ottoman Empire, thinking of Osman Hamdi Bey, who has been extremely renowned in the past few years and extremely commercially successful in, for example, auction houses. He spends a number of years in the early 20th century painting extremely Orientalist pictures, and scholars are still trying to decide why he did that. Arguably, his Orientalist pictures are not the same as European Orientalism in the sense that whereas Europeans might depict men smoking the hookah pipe or lounging in the sun or just, playing at leisure, Osman Hamdi Bey, an Ottoman polymath, a museum director, an academic, he depicts them intellectually engaged, perhaps in a theological conversation, reading the Quran, or in religious spaces, thinking. He depicts women not lounging semi-naked and sexually available, but also as reading, thinking agents, perhaps even engaged in mundane activities like hanging in the laundry. So there's a real perceivable difference in how he uses the language of Orientalism, although some of his contemporaries conceived it as a very damaging visual vocabulary. And he does it, and scholars are not quite sure why, because he didn't really write about his practice. We think it may be because of commercial viability of this genre. It makes a lot of money, and it's specifically targeted at European audiences. And by the same European audiences, he is perceived as a very authentic Orientalist who has the lay of the land. He understands the light. He understands the landscape. So he's privileged in using this vocabulary. So yeah, it's definitely not just a Western phenomenon, even in the 19th century.